Krishna. How are you?
Just fine.
Good to hear. Are you ready for Bhagavad Gita this evening?
Oh, yes, chapter 5.
Okay, welcome this evening, Wednesday, March 22nd. Discussions of Bhagavad Gita with myself and my beautiful crew of enthusiasts. We'll be studying chapter 5 of Bhagavad Gita, beginning with text 20. And I've titled this evening's class, The Qualities of a Transcendentalist. So we're going to see how Krishna discusses about the various transcendentalists and their qualities. First, let us do the invocation mantras, which shows respect, demonstrates respect to our teacher and teachers who are fulfilling filling our lives with knowledge, enthusiasm for life, empowerment and encouragement. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana-salakaya Chakshuru Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Svadantikam Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristaya Bhute Sri Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatya Dishotarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Narasimhaya Namaste Jaste Jase Avir Avir Bhava Badranaka Badradam Strakarmashayan Andayo Tamasa Grasom Swaha Abhayam Atmani Bhuishjaom Sham Radhe Radhe. So, welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining me this evening, this beautiful Wednesday evening here in sunny South Florida. I hope you have an equally enjoyable setting where you're coming from. I noticed a new name there. Susan? Is that Susan?
Yes, I'm sorry. Was in my car and pressed too many buttons. Sorry.
No problem, Susan. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so here we are. We're continuing in the Bhagavad Gita, 5th chapter. And even if you are joining us late, please understand that the Bhagavad Gita is very much interrelated, all the chapters, the text, etc. So a lot that has been spoken about will be repeated when the time calls for it, different points about spirituality, about yoga, etc. So this evening, we're concluding the 5th chapter, beginning with text 20. And Krishna starts it off in a very interesting way. He describes the qualities of a yogi, an advanced yogi. So I'll be reading from text 20 of the 5th chapter. A person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, who is bewildered, and who knows the science of God, is already situated in transcendence. So let's repeat that. Let's see what how Krishna is lining it up here. Neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant, nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, which is very consistent with what Krishna has been saying in previous chapters, specifically when we talk about Arjuna and Krishna's directions to Arjuna, wherein Arjuna was lamenting the fact that because he is a warrior and he must engage in this battle of Kurukshetra against friends and family members and teachers, etc., that he feels it's better or more spiritual to reject that duty and to leave his responsibilities behind, because consider he was a prince, Arjuna. He was a general in the army, a great military force. He was a husband, father. So he had a lot of responsibilities, very similar to what we all have. We all have our various responsibilities to both society and family and so forth. So in this case, Krishna is very surprising to Arjuna, because Arjuna says, no, I want to be more spiritual. I want to give everything up. And Krishna says, no, that's not more spiritual. That's less spiritual, because what you're doing is you have dharma, you have duties or responsibilities, and it is much better to perform your responsibilities than to reject your responsibilities. It will help you on your spiritual path more to be dharmic or to be responsible to your obligations. And Arjuna was a little surprised by that. He thought that maybe he'd get a pat on the back by Krishna because he wanted to go to the Himalayas and meditate and that way. But Krishna said, no, your responsibility, your duty, you must be dharmic. You can't be spiritually advanced if you're not dharmic, if you're not dutiful or responsible. So that was quite surprising to Arjuna. So here the qualities are described. Krishna says in his discussion in the 2nd chapter, Krishna describes yoga, samatvam. That means equipoised. That means whatever your circumstance, you maintain your equilibrium. That's the definition, the first definition that Krishna gives in regards to what is yoga. Samatvam. That's his first definition. The second definition, a few verses later in the second chapter, is karma koshalam. It's the art of work. In other words, there's two types of yoga I've described to you in previous classes. The yoga of the renunciate and action yoga. And both Patanjali and Krishna speak about both. Patanjali terms it Ashtanga yoga, the yoga of renunciation, and Kriya yoga, the yoga of action. Krishna talks about it and uses maybe a little different language because Krishna predates Patanjali by almost 3,000 years. And Krishna calls it karma yoga. And then Krishna also says an advanced form of karma yoga is bhakti yoga. And then the renunciate yoga that Krishna talks about is called jnana yoga. So they're talking basically about the same thing. Someone has their microphone on, I think, if you can check. Thank you. So now, this is very consistent to Krishna's instructions to Arjuna to be samatvam, to be equipoised. He's saying, neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant. Who is self-intelligent? Now, self-intelligent, the Sanskrit is sthira buddhi, which also means steadiness of intelligence. So in many ways, Krishna comes at yoga as being stable, meaning mind. The mind is steady, the mind is stable, the mind is equipoised, equanimity. These are all kind of synonyms regarding what Krishna's perspective is, what he's sharing with us as what is yoga. Equipoised, equanimity, stable, steady. And here he's used the word sthira buddhi, or self-intelligent, or steadiness of intelligence. So steady when things are going good for you or things are not going good for you. Self-intelligent, steadiness in intelligence. And that really means that your intelligence is used in such a way as to distinguish, because intelligence has the discriminatory power. So to distinguish between matter and spirit, to see that there is a difference, number one, between what is material and what is spiritual. And number two, to recognize the qualities or the characteristics of the material as opposed to the qualities or characteristics of the spiritual. Sanskrit word for material would be prakriti, and the Sanskrit word for spiritual would be purush. So to understand knowledge, and Krishna often emphasizes being knowledgeable. So knowledge means part of the understanding of knowledge from the perspective of yoga, specifically spoken about in Bhagavad Gita, is preliminarily understanding the distinction between matter and spirit. And that way you can apply it to yourself. What is your material dimension as opposed to what is your spiritual dimension? Your spiritual dimension is your prakriti, and that's referring to soul or the self, atma, or as Krishna used the Sanskrit word jiva. When Krishna talks about us, the living entity, the sentient being, he uses couple of different Sanskrit words. When he's referring to the prakritic side of us, the dimension of us, the material dimension of us, he doesn't use a word for soul. He uses a word for body, sharira, dehinam. And then when he's referring to us, the true nature of the entity, the living entity, which is the spiritual nature, when he's referring to that, then he talks about jiva or atma, that which is Brahman, that which is connected to the eternal realm of spirituality, the immortal, imperishable, happy qualities of the soul, the nature of the soul. So So self-intelligent means the study of an understanding of those natures. Who is unbewildered, who is not bewildered, person who's not bewildered, person who, by having this knowledge and this understanding of the distinction between matter and spirit, is not bewildered how to act in this world for the highest or ultimate benefit. There's two words used in Sanskrit when it talks about the results of our activities. One is shreyas and the other one is preyas. So if you do activities which are preyas, P-R-E-Y-A-S, preyas, those are activities where you experience immediate benefit. And Srila Prabhupada, in his commentary in the Bhagavatam, I believe, the Srimad Bhagavatam, he describes prayas, he uses the analogy of a child. If a child had his way in his immature state of existence, he would play all day. And that's called prayas activities because maybe he would get benefit, enjoyment by playing all day. But what would happen to that child when he was, 10 years older? Like I have an 8-year-old son. And if I allowed my son just to play all day, then where would he be when he's 18 or 28 or 38 in terms of his knowledge and his understanding of the world and how to interact within the world? So prayas activity means immediate benefit, immediate result. Shreyas means ultimate benefit. So what would be in keeping with the analogy of the child, we as parents have that child go to school every day from 8 in the morning to, I think my son gets out at 2. So 6-7 hours of education every day. And how long did your parents do that for? At the very least, probably through high school. And then I'm sure they, in some of your cases, coaxed you to go to college or university. So that's because they're thinking more along the line of Shreyas, ultimate benefit. So an intelligent person, self-intelligent, analyzes what strategy do I have for life? And how do I enact it in such a way that there's ultimate benefit to my life? Certainly there's going to be some immediate benefit there, some immediate results. That's just natural and due course of activities in human life. But also with the mind of preparing oneself, building a foundation for the future. And in this case, in terms of spirituality, we're talking about our eternal future. So that is a self-intelligent person. And the result of that steadiness or of intelligence and purification of intelligence, that's another quality that's listed by another Acharya, Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur, in terms of advanced yogi, means purified intelligence. So the result of self-intelligence and purified intelligence is the ability to distinguish between matter and spirit, and the ability to follow through on that distinction by performing not only activities which are prayas, which provide immediate benefit, but also provide ultimate benefit. That is these are the qualities of an advanced yogi as far as Krishna is concerned. And then he says, and who knows the science of God, that person is already situated in transcendence. So my teacher, Srila Prabhupada, was once asked, what is religion? Are there any distinctions in religion? And Srila Prabhupada's answer was, real religion means the development of love of God. And any strategy or any process that you are following by which you are exhibiting the symptoms of an advanced yogi or an advanced spiritualist, an advanced lover of God, that is real religion. So in this case, these qualities, who knows the science of God, therefore we have to gain knowledge about what is God and what is our relationship with God. And Krishna has been pounding that point home again and again. Knowledge of transcendence, knowledge of the Supreme, is purifying, it's educating, and it fixes us in meditation. Sometimes people say to me, I really can't meditate. I really can't control my mind. It's very hard for me to sit in meditation, et cetera, et cetera. But through the power of knowledge, we can actually purify the mind so that the mind becomes calm, becomes peaceful. Yogas chitta vritti narodaha is the definition that Patanjali gives in the Yoga Sutras about what is yoga. So in order to achieve that position of advancement in yoga, and one has to be situated in these various qualities. Equilibrium, not reacting to happiness or distress, self-intelligent, not bewildered about who you are and what the goal of life is, and who knows the science of God. Those are indicators of someone who is situated in transcendence. Text 21, such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance. So here he is further underscoring the qualities of an elevated yogi. Always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. Now, I don't want you to misconstrue what Krishna means by always being in trance. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're sitting there zoned out from the world. And there is a trance-like state that comes when one is very, very, very advanced, according to the definition of trance or samadhi in the Yoga Sutras, when one withdraws completely from sense and sense object interaction and is completely contained within. But this sense of trance that Krishna is speaking here means always connected. The word that he uses quite frequently in Sanskrit throughout the Bhagavad Gita is yukta. And yukta means that person who is linked up with transcendence. So that person can be interacting with the world and utilizing his or her senses to interact with the world. But the trance means understanding always being cognizant of the fact that I am a part and parcel of the Supreme. My goal in life is in service to the Supreme and performing activities of purification of mind and intelligence. And in this way, in such a state, one can always be yukta, always connected to the Supreme, no matter what one is doing. And Krishna says it in the 9th chapter, yat karoshi yadasnasi yat jahosi dadasya yat tapasyasya I forget the last line there. But he's saying all that you do, all that you give away in charity, all the work that you perform, all austerities that you perform, etc., do this in meditation on me. So that is the way one can be yukta, or always linked. And that state of mind is in trance. That means that you're always connected. And what is the result of that? Person enjoys unlimited happiness. Text 22. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. So what is Krishna saying here? An intelligent person does not do the very thing that is the cause of your suffering, the cause of your misery. So in that regard, if we keep doing things in this world that are causing us suffering, causing us pain, either mental, emotional, or otherwise, or physical. I mean, suppose I was banging my head against the wall and going, ow, ow, ow. You would say, Lakshmi, if you stop banging your head against the wall, you wouldn't be inflicting that pain on your head. And that's very true, but that's very observable. But we do things on a mental level or an emotional level that are repeatedly causing us suffering. So Krishna is saying here, why? An intelligent person wouldn't do that. An intelligent person, through purified intelligence, can recognize what are the causes of my suffering. And what does he do? He or she does not partake in the source of one's suffering. Just like you would tell me not to bang my head against the wall so that you would not be suffering, right? So similarly, when we are able to develop knowledge of the self and the position of the self and how the self can develop a strategy, which is ultimately called yoga, by which we can free ourselves from our attachments, which are the cause of our suffering. And that will actually, that is due to purified intelligence, and we could see that. So Krishna is saying here, an intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, named for Arjuna, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. So imagine, we recognize prayas, just like I used the analogy of a young child. Young child may not be able to recognize that me just playing all day is going to make me happy all my life. When we know from an objective and mature and an intelligent level, we know, no, that's not going to be the result, because when you get older and other things come upon you, other depths of responsibility are laid on your shoulders, just playing all day is not going to help you get through it and deal with it. So similarly, Krishna is saying, if you're just delighting in, or you're motivated by action, sense interaction with sense objects, and you're only motivated to get pleasure for yourself at that moment, that's not ultimately good use of your intelligence, because there is always, you can plan a trip, you can make so many plans to have enjoyment, but we've seen, I'm sure, in the history of our lives where we had a plan, and the plan, it didn't work out as we had planned, whether it be going out on a date or going on a trip, or taking a new job because it gives more money, and then entering into a relationship, and then we realize, wow, this is not what's going to make me happy, because it's not going to be fulfilling. See, a wise man looks to perform actions that are fulfilling, not just rewarding on a sensory level. Fulfilling. That means the heart is satisfied, not just the tongue or the eyes or the ears, because that comes and goes and that's flickering. But that which performing activities, that which is fulfilling to the heart, where I feel satisfied, I feel complete. So the wise person does not delight in them, Krishna is telling Arjuna. Before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world. So Krishna herein is using the word force. There are forces. Rupa Goswami, a great spiritual teacher in my lineage of Bhakti Yoga, he says that there are 6 basic forces. The force or the urge to speak, the urge of the mind to think so many thoughts, the urge of anger, the urge to speak, the urge of the belly to have it filled, and the urge of the genitals to to be chasing around after sensory enjoyment through the genitals. Rupa Goswami says, a person who's able to control those 6 urges, that person is called Goswami or Swami. You've probably, through your journey, have heard someone called Goswami or Swami, Swami this, Swami that. And usually when someone is given that title, when that title is bestowed upon someone, they have demonstrated practically that they can control these 6 forces. The urge to speak, that means just, not to rattle on, not to speak nonsense, not to be frivolous in speech, etc. The urge of the mind, which means controlled by the pushing and the churning and turning. In the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali uses the word vrittis. Vrittis means to turn. So the result of us taking in sensory input, the result of that, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch, etc., the result is that those sensory inputs are turned into vrittis. Some may call that thought. The literal definition of vritti, I believe, is turning. So the turnings of the mind is always turning and churning and whirling about. So to control that urge, that's the definition of yoga. To control that urge, to be peaceful in the mind, to be calm. I think it was William James, the great philosopher and psychologist of the early 1900s, said the beauty of the mind is its ability to choose its thoughts. Now, he wasn't a yogi, but he was certainly hitting on a yogic principle. I always tell my son, he's quite a precocious young man, and he likes to talk a lot. And I always tell him that you don't have to say everything that comes to your mind. You can apply a filter to that. You don't just, whatever, because his mind is very, very active. Therefore, he talks a lot from when he gets up in the morning until he goes to bed in the evening, constantly talking. He has a lot of good things to say, that's for sure. But as we grow older and more mature and our intelligence becomes stronger, we start editing out some things. We just don't allow a free flow expression of our thoughts. And one of the principles of yoga from the Bhakti Yoga tradition is to control that force, the force of speech, the force of the mind, and all of its churnings and turnings, the force of anger. Now, if you have an anger streak in you, when that clicks in, there's very little you can do. It just overwhelms you, and it happens. And then after you've realized it, you've calmed down a little bit, and then you regret it, because anger is a force. It's a devastating force. It's a force that can ruin everything. As a result of anger, you can do or say things that are harmful. So therefore, the yogi, the one who's practicing restraint, self-control, has to control the mind. And then there's the force of the tongue, jiva. He mentions it twice. The tongue in relationship to speech, but jiva means the tongue in relationship to eating. So one of the things that we have to control is what we eat. We don't eat indiscriminately, but we eat in a conscious state of mind. And that means 2 things. It means what we eat, when we eat, and how we eat. What mindset do we eat in? So what we eat, in terms of if you're a practicing yogi, or you want to be, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, he talks about yamas and niyamas as necessary to engage in yoga. And the first thing he mentions in terms of yamas is ahimsa, or nonviolence. And there's no way to get around the fact that nonviolence means no violence to any living entity. So therefore, that is why most serious yoga practitioners are vegetarian, because that is the ultimate way to commit the least amount of violence to any living entities. So, okay, so then so that's jiva, control the eating, what you eat, when you eat, that means the time. For instance, eating too late at night is neither good for you the next day or good for your health in a long-term fashion. And so it's what to eat, when to eat, and how to eat. How to eat, according to Ayurveda, is consciously. That we are in an environment, we construct an environment that's peaceful, non-agitating, and we're able to be in the moment, to be mindful of the tastes and the flavors and the temperature and the texture, to be mindful of eating while we're eating, instead of like you see a lot of people, they're on a computer and they're they're no way connected. My wife was telling me when she was in residency, internal medicine, all the doctors, they're eating their lunch and they're on their computer, finishing report, because they have such a heavy load of reports. They're all sitting there. They're not really conscious at all. I mean, they're a little bit conscious that something's going into their mouth, and they're conscious enough to chew it. But beyond that, no. And a lot of people get into that kind of mindset. So what to eat, when to eat, and what state of mind, how to eat, is very, very important. And that is the meaning of jivavega, the control of the tongue in eating. Udara means the control of the belly, that you just don't eat just to fill your belly because your belly wants food. Give me food. No, you have to eat according to Ayurveda in order to maintain maximum health. You never fill the belly with food. You always leave, I think the proportions, and I think Gokula, you're there, you can correct me if I'm wrong. You fill the belly halfway, and then there's 25% air and a percentage of water. But you never fill the belly. It's very difficult to handle digestion if you're on a full stomach. And I know personally, whenever I do it, because we don't do it in our household, we eat in moderation in terms of quantities. But whenever I do it, like if I go over someone's house to eat, and they're very enthusiastic to feed me, but when I do fill my belly, I feel it not only then immediately, because the body's working really hard to digest that food, especially if it's protein food or food that's very difficult to digest. The body's working in overtime, and then you're working so hard it's difficult to sleep, and of course when you get up the next morning you feel sluggish. So that control of the belly is also important, and control of the genitals also is considered a yogic principle, because that way we do not get overwhelmed by lust, and we become always chasing after a relationship, sexual relationship in that regard. It's best to become monogamous, and in a committed relationship, one of the symptoms, according to modern day psychologists, of love is commitment, and have a more fulfilling relationship in that regard. So these are the 6 forces that what is being spoken about by Krishna, that one is able to tolerate the forces of the material senses and the desires and anger. Person who is able to preliminarily put that into effect, some control, to the degree that we're able to do that, we can achieve happiness in this world. Text 24. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic He is liberated in the Supreme and ultimately attains the Supreme. So again, another reiteration of the point of control, and the word that Patanjali uses in his Ashtanga Yoga section is pratyahara, and that means the ability to bring the senses within and to understand the nature of who we are within the soul, and the nature of the Paramatma, the Supreme Soul that sits next to the soul. In this way, that kind of inner vision, inner sight has to be cultivated. And in that way, that person attains a state of liberation in the Supreme. That literally means, self-awareness, self-realization, and ultimately attains the Supreme. That means ultimately one becomes yukta, or linked up constantly in that. And the result of that, that's called the Brahma Bhuta stage. And what does Brahma Bhuta stage means? Na sochati, na kankshati. There's no lamentation. There's no force of desire. One is equipoised, as we mentioned before, samatvam, and one is steady. And that way, in such a state of Brahma Bhuta stage, or the steadiness stage, when one is connected or linked up with the Supreme, then happiness is experienced in a consistent and fulfilling way. And isn't that what we're looking? Is anyone not looking for happiness? Does anyone like to be miserable and to suffer? I mean, we know it's a natural response while being in this world, but if we're able to be tolerant, that's what Krishna says. This is a great quality of a yogi, of a person who's trying to make advancement on their path and their strategy. Matra sparshastu kontya sitoshna sukadukada agama payano nityas tung titikshashva bharata. Titikshashva means tolerant, that we tolerate, because we know, when we are objective, when we are looking back, we know anytime that we've gone through hard times in our life, eventually they're over. Eventually, if we were able to tolerate, we're to sit and to look at the lesson that is to be learned from this. I was just speaking to a friend of mine today, and he was revealing, to me how recently went through a hard time, and he said, a very hard time. He said, but I this time around, apparently it was something that reoccurred. He said, instead of playing the victim, I was looking at it from the perspective of, okay, what is the lesson to be learned? How can I grow from what happens? Because 90% of the suffering is not the actual occurrence, it's how we respond to the occurrence. That's where most of the suffering is. It's projected into the mind, and the mind does amazing things with what happened to us, and our interpretation and how we respond to that. So this practice of tolerance is a very important aspect of controlling, when we control. Otherwise, we get caught up by obstacles or disturbances that naturally come to us during our execution of our yoga. Patanjali describes that there are 9 different categories of disturbances that interrupt our performance of yoga. And when I say yoga, I'm not just talking about on the mat. I'm talking about when you, off the mat, beyond the mat, you are trying on every level to connect to the Supreme. Not just to be healthy physically or to look great, but I'm talking about yoga and all the philosophical, psychological ramifications that are there when one effectively practices yoga. So there are 9 different types of disturbances that interrupt our yoga. And the first one is illness. Sanskrit word is vyadhi. And this is why Ayurveda And I'm giving a plug here from my wife, who is also an Ayurvedic doctor. But this is why Ayurveda and yoga are called sister sciences. Because yoga recognizes that if you're not healthy in body and mind, you can't meditate. And Ayurveda recognizes if you're not healthy in body or mind, you can't meditate. So it really means that we have the duty, the responsibility to act in such a way that we can be healthy. Because if we're not healthy, then it's a disturbance. How can you sit peacefully if you're not healthy? If you're getting recurring or chronic situations and you're not dealing with it properly, then it's a disturbance. And the way Patanjali describes it, it's an imbalance of the doshas as a result of internal and external factors. And one of the things that Patanjali recommends, of course, is asana. And the other thing, the sister science, is Ayurveda. Seeing the body through the lens of Ayurveda, that the body needs to be balanced. When the body is in balance, it performs at its maximum efficiency. And if it's not, then it will perform at lower levels of efficiency, and eventually illness will take place. And we also have to recognize that age is a factor. We have to recognize that when we're aging, there are things that occur in relationship to the doshas, in relationship to the airs in the body, the fire in the body, the earth in the body, the ether in the body, that the situations change, and we have to be perceptive enough to make the adjustment in our life to counteract those changes that are going on naturally due to age. Like my wife would always tell me, Lakshmi, you're 73. It's natural to have joint pain, because the airs the air is getting more and more, in the body, more the tendencies to become imbalanced. And when the airs are imbalanced in the body, the dosha of Vata dosha, then you experience joint pain and anxiety and nervousness, and so many other things come from the result of that imbalance. So that's why Ayurveda deals with lifestyle and diet in terms of trying to bring oneself back to balance, so that we're not ill, we're not sick, and it doesn't cause severe interruptions in our practice of yoga. Second thing is idleness. What's that famous saying? Idleness is the devil's workshop, or something like that. So idleness means physically, but it also means mentally. I've seen personally when a person declines in mental health, they have a tendency to withdraw. Like my mother, a very beautiful soul, she developed dementia started to develop at the age of 85. And one of the things I noticed about her, she was very active, but when she got into the throes of dementia, the more it came on, the more she withdrew, the more she stopped doing things physically and mentally. And I know there was a study about longevity, and that study showed that there was a group of nuns in Michigan who all of them were living to be in their 90s and 100s. And what it was, one of the conclusions of the study was that they were teachers. So even they were 90 years old, they were still teaching. So that means they were always using their brain. They were always stimulating their brain. So it's a really healthy thing to do. And here, one of the disturbance is to the determination, to the steadiness, all of the factors that play into a sadhana, a regular practice in yoga, is are we being idle? Are we getting lazy? We're not active physically, we're not active mentally, and this idleness can be one of the reasons why it's very difficult to perform yoga. Then doubt. So, this is samshaya. The Sanskrit word for idleness, if you're interested, is sthana. Doubt is the third thing listed here as far as obstacles or disturbances in yoga. Samshaya is yoga, valid or not, doable or not. So that means you have to get beyond doubt to commitment. And that helps us in our yoga practice. How do you do that? Through knowledge. That's why I highly recommend anyone and everyone, to have a strong swadhyaya. Swadhyaya means self-study and study of sacred texts, and to hear from learned people. I highly recommend that to everyone, because that is that which dispels doubt. It's natural to have doubt. Whenever you hear something, there's so many things that you hear, especially within the Vedas, that may cause doubt. There's an elephant head boy called Ganesh. There's a demigod that's garlanded in snakes and has matted locks, and moon resides in his hair, and the Ganges flows to his head. There's a lot of things that in your sojourn through the yogic path may cause some doubt or lack of commitment, lack of faith, but that's why knowledge and studying of these things is of ultimate importance. Number 4 is carelessness, pramada, or lack of foresight, lacking the foundation to practice, to really be steady in sadhana in your practice. That will help to get over any of these obstacles and build a strong foundation, a strong sense of commitment and determination. Number 5 is laziness, and that also can mean due to fatigue or lack of effort. There's one thing of being fatigued, and there's another thing of being not putting forth the effort. So the effort has to be there, and that means a determination to do something regularly over a long period of time, and to do it properly. Not only regularly over a long period of time, but also to do it properly. Number 6 is dissipation, that avirati, or overindulging in sense enjoyment, or kind of a greediness also of mind. So this is very sapping of physical energy, and it's considered to be a obstacle or a disturbance to practicing yoga. This is number 7 is a very interesting one, and please try to understand. To cultivate or harbor false views or mistaken knowledge. Patanjali talks about that when he talks about vrittis, the 5 types of vrittis, and that one of them is erroneous knowledge. And he gives the example of the mother of pearl. One thinks that I just have to close this here. One thinks that the mother of pearl is actual pearl, but it's not. So to cultivate false knowledge, mistaken ideology, actually can be detrimental to one's advancement, can serve as an obstacle or a disturbance to one's yoga. Especially nowadays, so much comes at us through the internet, and so many theories, so many philosophies, so many ways. Some people want to accept everything, they don't want to reject anything. And some people have a very, very narrow perspective, and they only want to accept one way, or it's the highway. But what it's being spoken about here in terms of this false views or mistake is actually a cultivation of knowledge, so you can distinguish what may be erroneous. You can't tell what is a diamond or gold unless you know what is true gold or a true gem. So unless that knowledge is there, you can't distinguish between something which is erroneous in terms, someone tells you something because of their speculation, as opposed to what the real understanding is about that point. It can become a big disturbance in one's practice. Number 8 is lack of perseverance. One who has lack of perseverance, we need to persevere. We need to have determination. And this is a big failure to attain a steadiness in our practice, that determination. And lastly, instability or regression. And this is the failure to maintain one's level of progress. We should always see our yoga practice in relationship to progress. We always have to be progressing. Even if it's in little tiny baby steps, we have to progress. Little bit, just like I used the analogy before of a rocket ship. If a rocket ship, you shoot it into the air, if there's no forward progression, it just hovers and gravity will pull it down. But if a rocket ship maintains forward motion, progression, it breaks the force of gravity. So the force and the influence of the modes of material nature, we can transcend them if there is regular and steadiness in our practice. So those are obstacles or disturbances. So getting back to the Gita, number 25, those are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, which we just discussed, whose minds are engaged within, who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings, and who are free from all sins, achieve liberation in the Supreme. Now, sin, the literal, I've said this before, there's a Judeo-Christian connotation to sin, but sin also means error in judgment in one's life, making bad decisions. So, and comment on who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings. That's an important aspect, that we are giving, not always looking to receive, and to give knowledge, to give your friendship. All of these things are very important, and they are also symptomatic of one who is advancing or progressing on their spiritual path. Number 26, those who are free from anger and all material desires, who are self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future. So Krishna is kind of reiterating the points that he made. 27 and 28, shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the two eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence. The transcendentalist aiming at liberation becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated. So here Krishna is actually describing meditation. You have to draw the senses within, keeping the eyes fixed between the eyebrows when one is not closing the eyes, but trying to keep the eyes slightly open and fixed. Breath work is very important. Also pranayama, that's very important in terms of keeping the mind peaceful and calm. So all of these things Krishna is listing how to engage in meditation. And this is the final verse. What time is it? Yes. A person in full consciousness of me knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So this, my teacher, this particular verse, my teacher would describe as the peace formula. Why? Full consciousness of one's relationship with divinity. Knowing that there is a higher force. In the case of Bhakti Yoga, it's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the case of Jnana Yoga, it's Brahman. There is this transcendent being or force that we are to connect or link up with. And knowing, Krishna here is actually speaking to more to Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, knowing me, the personality of Godhead, to be the ultimate benefit. In other words, when we perform sacrifices or we do things, we do them as an offering to the Supreme. That we went over extensively in the 4th chapter, how sacrifice connected to the Supreme is the purification. A result of that is purification of the heart and the mind. And then thus one is in a proper state of mind to advance spiritually. And so knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, it means the offering with God in mind, the Supreme in mind. The Lord of all planets and demigods, making that distinction between source, cause, and effect, making that distinction and understanding. And the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities. And that's a very interesting point. He says, Surit Sarva Bhutan. I'm the friend of all living entities. And that's a very important principle, because the ways around the obstacles that we were talking about, the 9 obstacles in terms of our disturbances in our devotional service, is listed as follows. Chanting. Chanting is a big way to help us to get beyond those 9 obstacles or disturbances in the practice of our yoga, the idleness and the laziness and all the things that we discussed previously. So chanting, particularly in Bhakti Yoga, it's chanting, connecting with the sacred names of God. And when one does so, then this is a great purifying force which helps us to vanquish the 9 obstacles or the 9 disturbances that we discussed. This is something that can be easily incorporated into your life. It just requires, again, commitment and dedication. 51 years ago, I took a vow to chant every day for 2 hours a day, and by good fortune, I've been able to maintain that. So that I feel, and continue to feel, has been the main source of whatever strength I have to perform yoga. I see a hand up. I won't ignore you. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Whoever.
That is your hand, Lakshmi. You have to lower your hand.
I have a lot of questions. Okay, as long as I'm not ignoring somebody, okay? And friendliness, compassion, gladness, and equanimity are described as actions that can help you get across your obstacles or disturbances in terms of your practice of yoga. So I'll stop here. Does anyone have any questions or comments regarding what has been said thus far?
I do.
Okay. I'm listening to you. Sid, I'm listening to you. I just want to plug in my never mind. I'll have to wait.
Okay. So here's my question. You and I were talking about non-duality a couple of days ago. And The number 25, it speaks of those who are beyond the dualities. Isn't that non-duality?
Yeah, but it means recognition of the true eternal nature of the soul. It does not mean, from the Bhakti perspective in particular, and from Patanjali's perspective, they both espouse duality, that there's Prakriti and Purusha. But what that means is being fixed in Brahman, being fixed in the spiritual dimension of one's life. That's the priority. Because you see, all the qualities of a transcendentalist, they're fixed in that Brahmabhuta stage, in that stage of recognizing the true nature of the soul and acting accordingly. Yeah, and also we have to look at the Sanskrit on that too to see exactly what's being said and in the context it's being said. But that's my response regarding Krishna's mentioning of non-duality.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hare Krishna. Can I ask
I-
a question?
Yes, Gayatri, go ahead, please.
So when we spoke about these urges or forces, there was the force of the tongue.
Yes.
What is that? I did not understand.
Well, there's 6 urges or forces. 2 of them are in relationship to the tongue. One is called bacho vegam, the force of the tongue to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The other aspect of tongue is the force of the tongue to eat. And in regards to what Rupa Goswami, the point that he's making is they have to be controlled. You have to bring them into balance. And that means really, this is again where Ayurveda helps. Ayurveda helps you to identify your nature. My wife was telling me a funny story. The other day, a lady came into our, to see her, a patient, and she says, I want to be thin. And my wife looked at her and she said, you'll never be thin. and the woman was like shocked. And so my wife started laughing. She said, because you have to understand what is your nature. Your nature is kapha. And kapha people don't get thin. They have a tendency to be. That's the kaphic nature, and you're kapha. So she explained it very nicely. And the lady got quite a kick out of that fact that doctor told her you'll never be thin. So jiva vegam, the urge of the tongue to eat, means also you have to understand your nature and you have to embrace it. Right now, what we have as far as brainwashing is concerned is this is the way a beautiful woman looks. She's 6 feet tall and 100 pounds. And she can wear all the clothes she wants, any clothes, and that's what's being pushed on young girls. Now imagine a young girl who is kupfic by nature, which means she's going to be big boned and tendency to be a little heavy set, etc. And that's what drives these young girls crazy, because they want to achieve what's being promoted as beauty, when in fact what is beauty is their heart. Kupfic, and that's what my wife told this lady. She says, you have to understand, you're kupfic by nature, you'll never be thin, but your heart is beautiful. And you have to embrace your nature. So, jiva begam, urge to eat, means according to your nature. Some people never get heavy. That's a vata. No matter what they eat or how often they eat or how much they'll never get it. Me, I have to eat, and sometimes my wife gets on my case because I have to eat to keep weight on me. I don't like to go below a certain weight. I like to be at 140 pounds. And sometimes I go down to 135, 134 easily. I'll go, if I eat lightweight, I eat a light diet, I'll go down quickly. And so I have to eat to maintain weight. That's just my body nature. So that's Jiva Vegam, the nature of the tongue to eat. Vacho Vegam means the nature of the tongue to speak. And in that regard, people who like to gossip and rumor mongering, uncontrollably using the force of speech in a way which is not beneficial to them, but is actually detrimental. So that's what I was saying.
The
So
same is true for
there are
lying.
6 forces, and for example, there is force of the tongue, and there is one force to speak, and there is one urge of stomach, which they're kind of similar.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
They're not similar if you think about it. You think about the force of speech. Someone can be talkative, but be very thin and not eat very much. They don't have any.
What I mean to say, for example, we have one which is called urge to talk.
Right.
One is force of the tongue, which is urge to talk, and force of the tongue in one sense looks similar. And also we have urge of stomach and force of the tongue.
Right, to eat.
So it's 6, but in reality it's actually 5, because force of the tongue, it already repeats urge to talk or urge of the stomach.
Well, I would say more the urge of the tongue to eat, jiva vegam, and udara vegam, which is the filling of the belly, are very, very connected. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So and then Patanjali also recommends to to chant mantra. Is there a mantra that Patanjali recommends to get rid of all of those urges?
The thing about Patanjali is he purposely is more secular than religious. Because his purpose was to preserve the practice of proper meditation and not so much to promote. I mean, there's good reason to believe, according to Dr. Edwin Bryant, who was a scholar in this regard, he said there's very good reason to believe that Patanjali was a Vaishnava, but he didn't come out promoting. He does mention Ishvara Pranidan, and that is, to meditate on God. He does mention that, but he doesn't promote a particular God, in that regard. He does promote that in terms of meditation, then, to meditate on God as one of the alambanas. He lists like 7 different objects of meditation that you can choose from. And the first one he lists is Ishvara Pranidan, to absorb yourself in God. So he, in getting back to your question, he mentions the word Om.
Mm-hmm.
From Patanjali's perspective, yeah.
Okay.
Krishna more leans toward God's names.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, the mantra, the Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, which is this the name of God, or is this something else?
No, that's a very Vaishnava. That's a very.
And what does it mean? What does it mean, this mantra?
Om is the prefix. Many mantras are prefixed by Om to set the mood, the transcendental mood. Namo, I pay my respects to Vasudev, another name for the Supreme.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you so much.
Bhagavate Vasudev. So the Supreme Lord Vasudev. It's a names of God.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else have any question, comment, observation, realization? Anything you would like to share with the rest of everybody here? No? If not, again, I want to thank you, from the bottom of my heart, from being with me, spending the time with me this evening. Your association is greatly appreciated, and I look very much forward to it every week. I hope you all feel the same. again, thank you for your questions and thank you for your participation. Until next week, we'll begin with, so I know Celia always asks, is anything we can do in preparation for next week? Next week, we start with the 6th chapter. And the 6th chapter is a very interesting chapter. It's the Dhyana Yoga section of Bhagavad Gita, the section of mind and meditation. So you can read the 6th chapter. You would be safe if you can't do the whole chapter, read half of it. I don't think I would go beyond the half of, so you can read chapter 6, and I think it goes up to around 47 verses or something like that. So if you want the minimum, I would say read the first 20 verses. Maximums, you could read the whole chapter. Okay. Again, thank you, folks. Good evening.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Lakshmi, and everyone else, of course.
Yes, thank you all.